This is Anna Hamilton with the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program at the University of Florida. Today is Thursday, November 7th, 2024, and we're at the University of West Florida to interview Dr. Kwame Owusu-Daaku.
Yes.
Awesome. For the Pensacola Environmental Oral History Project, and I'm joined by my colleagues from the Oral History Program as well as the Gulf Scholars Program. Sorry, y'all, I'm tripping over my words. So with that, I would love for you to introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about who you are.
Yes, so my name is Dr. Kwame Owusu-Daaku. I am an associate professor here in the Department of Earth and Environmental Sciences at the University of West Florida. I'm originally from Ghana. I was born there, spent most of my formative years there. My parents are college professors back in Ghana, so between, I think, the ages of 3 and 5, they were getting their PhDs in the UK, so I lived there with them, came back to Ghana, did schooling all the way up until college. I did a 1-year high school exchange program in the US. It was my first time in the US. I lived in Indianapolis, Indiana. The first time I went back since that time was 2 weeks ago. I'd never been back to Indianapolis yet. So that was fun to go back and see people and catch up. And then I left, so I did my undergrad in development planning in Ghana. I describe development planning as if development studies or international development or national studies and urban planning had a love child, that would be development planning. So basically thinking about urban planning, but in the context of what we would call a developing nation. And so you're less concerned about maybe the state of roads or zoning and setback, even though you are concerned about those things, but you're thinking about how can we provide basic schools to communities and running water and electricity, like some of those like basic core needs that maybe in other parts of the world are like standard or we take for granted. And so after that, I lived for a year in a village, sort of teaching and working there and working with schools and churches there. It was kind of like a short-term missions program. But in Ghana, we do what we call national service. It's supposed to be like AmeriCorps for everyone who goes to like university tuition free. It's kind of morphed into something different because now people use it to get cushy jobs in the city with companies that they hope will employ them after their service year, But basically, it's a year that all college graduates work for minimum wage, as a way to sort of give back for their education. Because most of education, or for education for most people, is tuition free, like in Ghana. And then from there, I taught high school, human geography for a year. And then I came to the US to study my master's in urban and regional planning at the University of Iowa. And so from then, I got a PhD in geography from the University of South Carolina. And then I ended up here in Pensacola because I got a job here right before I graduated. So.
I'm struck by how international your education and your childhood and your upbringing really is, and I'm wondering if you can reflect on that a little bit for us. I'm also thinking about your parents and your early exposure to higher education.
I think, it's interesting. I never thought of it as international. My wife and I the other day not the other day, it was like probably about 3 years ago, where it's probably 2019, we're thinking, one day we're driving, like on the, local highway, and then we're like, wait, we're bilingual, because everybody, so in Ghana, I speak English. Ghana was a British colony, and so we are educated in English, English is the official language, medium of instruction and commerce. But then almost everyone, most people can speak a local language, and the local language most people can speak is the one I speak, called Twi, T-W-I. And so when you speak Twi in Ghana, like you don't really feel like you can speak another language because everyone can probably understand what you're saying, at any point in time. And so in Ghana, you never, if you speak Twi in English, like everybody speaks Twi in English, So we were just, I was like, yeah, we're actually bilingual, like we never thought of it that way. And so it's interesting that you say my upbringing was international, because I've also never thought of it quite that way. But yeah, my parents were actually working for the university before they went to get their PhDs. I think it was a time when people could still like start working as university lecturers with master's degrees in Ghana. I think it's shifted, some. And so I think, yeah, just growing up with books, standard thing. My parents had like encyclopedia, like the book that, multiple books as an encyclopedia, and I always used to hate it when I would ask my mom a question. I was like, what is this? And she'd be like, go look it up in the encyclopedia. I was like, oh. And so sometimes I remember getting older, I would preface it by saying, I'm about to ask you a question. Don't tell me to go look up the answer in the encyclopedia. And so, yeah, I think that was, having books around was just a normal part of like growing up. And I think also maybe getting a college degree just seemed normal. Like it took getting older and even getting to college before I realized, getting to high school before I realized how big of a deal getting a college degree was for some people. For me, it was like, of course you get a college degree. Like that's the bare minimum, again, just having parents like with, master's degrees and PhDs, it just seemed like a bachelor's degree was like the standard, minimum. So it definitely was something I took for granted even growing up. I grew up on a university campus, and so, but I think also what was cool about where I grew up was that the school that I went to, even though it was like the sort of university, like basic school, it allowed like people from across the city. So the city I grew up in was Kumasi. It's the second largest city in Ghana. And it allowed people from outside the university community to attend. And so it made it a very diverse school, as diverse as a country like Ghana could get, like economically speaking, because most people are black in Ghana, and so you won't see a lot of racial diversity, but I think that economic diversity was also very healthy and helpful for me, because it then made me be aware of the privilege that I had in the society that I was growing up in, and it also made me sort of care more for others. I don't remember actually being told that, I needed to take care of people who were less fortunate or, care about their plight or whatever. But I think just being in school and having friends who had less than I did, or like I just, I began to care about those things. And so, yeah, it's a very interesting line of questioning, because I've never like connected these dots that far back, as to the reasons why I'm engaged in some of the work I'm engaged in now is coming from like the kind of childhood like I had. But yeah, thank you for that question.
Well, I'm actually gonna, let me know if you want me to reroute too, but that makes me curious to hear if there is kind of a concrete memory or event that you can think back to that is related to this idea of economic diversity being important to you.
I think it wasn't until I was older, and probably even in the US, before I recognized their value and became maybe grateful for that diverse experience I'd had economically, But I think just also, and just I guess to give credit where it's due, I think also my faith, like growing up in a Christian household, like you were taught like to care for the downtrodden and the poor and all of those things. And so I think just suddenly recognize that, okay, there's friends who I have who, don't have as much money as I have, or, like they can't get whatever books they need whenever they want, just made me, I was like, this is kind of the right thing to do, and this is the thing maybe God wants me like to do in that sense. And so I can't think back to a specific memory. I can think back to friends who made me aware of just the privilege that I had, that thing that I had taken for granted that I thought everybody had exposure to. There was also some teasing. So there's an expression, and I don't think I can really convey it well in English, but it's an expression, we call it dadaba. So ba is the Twi word for child, and the Twi word for father is eja, So, but dada is like kind of, a more anglicized, word. And so an ejaba is somebody who is like traditional and local, and a dadaba is somebody who has like access to money, or so I was always seized as a dadaba, and again, I think also having parents who had like lived abroad, and some of the grown up on cartoons and stuff like that, and so Disney cartoons, things like that, so I definitely did have a different view of the world, but I think, yeah, there was no concrete memory, but it just different experiences and exposures and friendships and things that, yes, just maybe very fully aware of that, and also recognize that it's the right thing to do to help others who are less fortunate. Yeah.
And what were your parents' area of research or teaching?
Yes, so my dad is a biologist, and my mom is a pharmaceutical chemist, but she has, so obviously biology and chemistry, but she has over time gone more into the social side of pharmacy, thinking about clinical manner and community engagement, and creating more access, to pharmacy services, especially like in rural and urban areas, things like that. Yeah, but my dad teaches anatomy, physiology, courses like that. So I had never thought of myself as a scientist, not in Ghana. Like the only my ability to call myself a scientist actually happened in the US. Like in Ghana, I would never have called myself a scientist. For the longest time, I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to, and I can't even tell you why, but again, maybe thinking back to downtrodden, justice, helping those in need, because I also only wanted to be a criminal justice lawyer. That was the only kind of lawyer I wanted to put the bad guys behind prison. But then I also began to really grapple with the ethics of that, because when I realized that there was something called privilege, client, attorney privilege, and if a client came to me and they said, yeah, I did it, I murdered this person, I was almost bound as a lawyer to protect. I was like, but I can't do that. If you did something wrong, you must face the consequences, So even at a very early age, I began to grapple with that idea, and I still wanted to be a lawyer, but as soon as development planning came along, and it was more directly helping those who don't have access to clean water, and I was like, okay, yes, this is what I want to do. I think justice then took on another definition, for me, and I think that also kind of led into my current focus on environmental justice as well. Again, that was something that happened in the US, and even happened actually happened when I got to UWF. I would never have described myself as an environmental justice scholar or researcher. It kind of just fell into it, The more I started engaging with Superfund and brownfields and issues of contamination, issues of environmental justice came to the fore, and it's okay, well, I can't be thinking about redeveloping or reusing these sites if I'm not addressing sort of the environmental justice implications of them. I apologize for jumping ahead, and I think you have a method, and I'm not following it.
The method is to talk to you and listen to what you're saying, and this is really great, and I think you're connecting a lot of dots which are really interesting and help us understand a little bit about your work. I want to put a little bit of a pin in that, and to think about kind of the time you studied abroad in the U.S. and then you do end up kind of coming over and getting your degrees here. I'm curious to hear a little bit more about your evolution of how you think of yourself as a scientist, and just a little bit more about how your research interests developed as you come over.
Yeah, so the reason why I never thought of myself as a scientist was, one, the parents I had, very biophysical scientists, what we would call hard scientists. I definitely, by college, I definitely thought of myself as a social scientist, but not in sort of the maybe conventional, sense. And part of it was also because of the way schooling is in Ghana. In Ghana, in middle school, you have to decide what track you're going to go into. So you take a big exam middle school is 7th, 8th, 9th. So you take a big exam at the end of 9th grade to get into high school. And when you register for that exam, you have to decide, when I go to high school, I want to study the sciences, humanities. We had general arts, which is kind of more like social sciences, visual arts, technical, so you had to pretty much decide, which I think it's problematic because who knows what they want to do, at that age. But because I knew I was probably capable of doing science, but there was nothing that really interested me, nothing that stood out to me. So I thought of being a doctor, and a lot of my teachers were disappointed, because I was a smart little nerd, and so they were like, "Oh my God, you could do medicine or engineering." But like when I thought about being a doctor, I was like, "Nah." Being an engineer, nah. But when I thought about being a lawyer, I was like, yeah, like I wanna, that gave me some excitement. And so I quickly, very early on made the decision to go into general arts. So I think I had sort of, at least in my mind, closed off being a scientist, And so I think maybe I don't know if I didn't really consider it then, but coming over to the US, for that, high school exchange year, and again, I was able to do it because at the time, Ghana, we all had like a mandatory gap year. Like we would write, again, a big exam to get into college, but we would write it in, or the exam would maybe begin in maybe June and maybe end in maybe August. And of course, the exam ends in August, like, the college semester is going to start in September or something. And so there's no time for them to grade, and this is a national exam, so there's no time to grade those papers. So the results come in December, and then you apply to get to college for the next year. So we all ended up taking like a mandatory gap year. So my parents, definitely had the means, and I think I probably blackmailed them, into letting me go on this, high school exchange program. But coming to the US and then realizing just the options available, to people. I still was very much cemented on my idea to be a lawyer because I took a law and ethics course. I joined like a mock trial class. Like I was like, yeah, I definitely want to do this, But then also just taking other courses and being able to realizing that, yeah, if I'd wanted to take chemistry or fit, like I could, and I would be able to do it and do well in it. So I didn't really rebrand myself as a scientist then, but it definitely made me want to come back to school in the US, And I think even while I was there, I actually wanted to attempt to do undergrad there. I don't think I got in anywhere. One, because I was a bit too idealistic in where I was applying to, but then also it's just so expensive, especially, as a non-citizen or permanent resident. And so I went back to school in Ghana. And of course, development planning was very much social science. There's a lot of project management, a lot of economics, geography. And because in high school, I had done geography, economics, math. We call it elective. There's a core math that everyone does in elective math. I hate math. I'm bad at it, but I'm also kind of grateful my parents made me do it, because they were like, if you do elective math, you give yourself more options. And they were right, And so I did that, and because of that, like I saw myself as just a social scientist, And so by the time I got into planning, I was like, okay, now I'm an urban planner. Again, I see it could be quantitative if I want it to be. I don't really like math, and so even in my master's program, like I really struggled with my stats courses. Like those were my hardest, courses. Financing for, what was it called? Community development financing. Like, oh my God, like I hated that class, because it was just a lot of math and accounting and stuff like that, But I got through it. Again, still not seeing myself as a social scientist, yes, I really got into surveying and interviewing and focus groups. I think that's when I began to develop those kinds of skills, And I think when I started thinking about PhD programs, I was like, yes, it would be cool to be a mixed methods, person. But then I also just decided, you know what? I'm going to get a PhD. I might as well specialize. I really liked qualitative research. I'm going to be the best qualitative researcher I can be. So if someone's looking for a very good qualitative researcher, they will think of me instead of wanting to be able to do it all. And so I kind of made that decision like early on in my PhD, or even in wanting to apply to PhDs, that I was only going to do qualitative research. Like I was not open to doing mixed method stuff, And so, again, still not thinking of myself as a scientist, as a as a biophysical scientist, as a social scientist for sure. I went through the PhD, it was all qualitative, lots of interviews, lots of focus groups, lots of content analysis. And then it wasn't until I showed up here, because my department, one is Earth and Environmental Sciences, but it's also in a College of Science and Engineering, a lot of the people like around me, are like chemists and physicists. Even in my department, the soil scientists and meteorologists and climatologists, like all of these people. And so my first year was kind of hard because I felt a lot of imposter syndrome. I was like, I don't belong. I was like, I should have been in the geography department. That would be better. Like, even though there's physical geographers, human geographers, like, I have my place, but now what does it mean to be an environmental scientist? Like, I didn't have that kind of training. And even when I was thinking about courses I needed to develop, I was like, oh, it needs to be more environmental science, but I didn't feel like I knew what the field was about. One blessing that I did have was that I came at a time where, or I think part of the reason why I was hired was that they really wanted to build up we have two tracks, the natural science track and environmental management track, and so they really wanted to shore up classes and content in the environmental management track, and so they gave me a lot of blank slates. Like, I developed like 4 new courses that first year, and we teach 3, it's a 3-3 load. So like that first year, like 4 out of 6 of courses I'm teaching where I made them up, and so I was like, it gave me a lot of freedom, and also it helped me sort of come into my own and be like, you know what? I belong here, It took a while. I had to remind myself that, okay, I'm no longer a PhD student. I don't have an advisor looking over my shoulder, like evaluating my work. It was kind of scary, but also very freeing to recognize that, like, I'm the one in charge now, so I get to decide. And like, the students don't know what this course is supposed to look like. I'm telling them what this course is, and so I should find some freedom in that, But I think being in this department, and also realizing that, like, the skills I was bringing was needed, now allows me to just say I am a scientist. Like, I don't feel the need to qualify it anymore. Depending on whom I'm talking to, I may qualify it, but I can say I'm a scientist and not feel like, oh, well, I'm a social scientist. Like, I don't feel the need to qualify, or feel like I'm posing to be something that I'm not. Yeah.
So you joined UWF in 2017.
Yes.
And I would love for you to tell us about your research interests as they kind of start to gravitate towards the brownfield and Superfund work that you've done here in Pensacola. And I'm sorry, I'm doing that really annoying thing where I'm like, and also this other question. But you told us that, like, as a young scholar and in your earlier life, that justice was important for you as a value in your personal and professional life. And so I'm asking you to talk about your research interests as they evolve here, and also how justice figures into that work.
So my PhD research was on climate change adaptation in a river delta in Ghana, and from the perspective of multiple stakeholders. And so I, did interviews with people who lived in these mainly fishing communities, some farming lands adjacent. Interviewed what they thought about these. The government has built these coastal protection infrastructures, seawalls, levees, some groins, all of these, some systems of protection. And then, so I was interviewing people on the ground, people in the district level, people in the national government, what they thought about, those things. And so in that research, there was an instance of a community which was right at the estuary, in that delta where the river meets the ocean, who after basically that part of the, that estuary had been protected with a seawall, were now at threat of having a real estate company push them off their land, And so they were protesting, and I just stumbled across that story. I was interviewing people too. They asked me, are you from that real estate company? I was like, what? Wait, what? They were like, oh yeah, this company is coming around and trying to get us off our land. I was like, oh, there seems to be a story here. And so it became this whole chapter in my dissertation. And even though when I wrote about it then, I didn't really think of it as a environmental injustice that I was dealing with. It was like, okay, somebody's taking advantage of this adaptation and they are trying to get it for their own means, and this is wrong. But for some weird reason, I never captured it in terms of environmental justice, because I had really thought environmental justice was things that happened, forgive my phrasing, things that happened to poor black people in the US, that was my sort of conception of, conceptualization of environmental justice. And so this happened in Ghana, they're fighting it, it's different. I didn't think it was. But now I see it as clear as day. And so even when I came here, I was writing about that stuff and publishing for my dissertation. I probably still am publishing a few things for my dissertation. And I was still looking for a way, and I think that was part of my disconnect, because I was looking for a way to continue that work, but I felt so far removed from it. And I also didn't feel like at the time that UWF had such an international focus. At least my students didn't seem to have an international focus. And then I realized that when I wanted to work with a student on stuff I was doing, like I almost had to bring them up to speed on international development in general before we can get to them. I don't know if this is going to work. Like, how am I going to get a project going if I now have to almost teach students about international issues before they can start doing research? And so when I got that, this email, it was actually an email from Eric Spalvins in EPA Region 4 that, hey, we see, he was literally like, we checked your faculty webpage, we see you have a master's in urban planning, the county wants to engage in the planning process for redeveloping the Superfund site, which is ready for reuse. And you can also help, it would help you serve this community, or the county that probably can't afford a consultant for this. Your students would get real life experience, would you help us? And so I think it connected a few dots. It connected this underserved, helping the people underserved. It also connected, I had really, during my PhD, really got into, during my master's and my PhD, got into sort of civic scholarship and community engaged work and the value of that and how important it is. And so I was like, okay, it's helping an underserved community, it's helping my students become more civically responsible, and it's a planning process. And that I know. The Superfund stuff, I'm not an expert, it's not what I do, but at least I know the planning stuff. And so I said yes. I wasn't really sure, but I said yes, it's a cool experience, I'll learn. I was wishing that in my master's I'd focus more on environmental planning than maybe housing and community development, because I know there were classes that looked at brownfields and super. I heard those words in my master's program, but from those who were doing that specialization. And so I was beginning to kick myself, but I was like, okay. And all they're asking for is I had to clarify, you just want the planning process, right? You don't want me to do any, because I can't do any soil analysis or groundwater assessment. I can't do any of that. It's yes, we just want you to help kickstart a process. And so I said yes to that. And I think that really led me, or the more I said yes to that, and the more I became involved in that work, I then realized sort of the environmental justice implications of this work, that a lot of these sites, were, placed in, low income and or minority communities. A lot of the communities were suffering sort of the legacies, of this, and a lot of the communities were not benefiting even from the cleanup, that these sites could be cleaned up and reuse and gentrification would happen. And so I began to grapple with all of these things. And I think that's when the shift, it was almost by project happened, but it wasn't until I think I started working with a community, because the work I had done locally in Escambia County, Pensacola, was more working with city council and folks. There was one black neighborhood, the Wedgwood neighborhood. You see some people nodding, so I think you may have heard of that neighborhood. They had reached out to me, and I had done some work with them. And I think those were the moments where I was getting more explicit, But I think it became full-blown when a colleague at University of South Florida, who is the director for their Center for Brownfields Research and Redevelopment, was reached out to do some work in Port St. Joe. And he was like, well, I'm in Tampa, that's 6 hours away, but I know someone who's closer. I mean, it's still 3 hours away, but he's close in Pensacola. And then he sort of brought me into that work, Christian Wells. And so I think that's when it became full-blown. I was like, okay, I think I'm an environmental justice scholar now, or researcher now, that it's kind of no going back, and it's my thing now, and my students know me for that, and I harp on it a lot of times, and I don't shy away from it or back down from it, and so yeah, I think that was some of the evolution of kind of how it happened.
That's great, thank you. I have so many questions in my mind about. No, it's great. It's perfect. I just keep kind of thinking about you finally realizing, okay, actually I am an environmental justice scholar. And I feel comfortable saying that. I don't feel like I have to defend it.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more about, I guess I'm thinking, can you zoom in a little bit more about like, okay, these are the things that I learned from this work that really make me feel like I have the credentials or the familiarity and the know-how.
Yeah, I think it was really, I realized that environmental justice is a lot of maybe movement building and a lot of, it's more process than just like outcomes. Yes, because you can do the analysis and come up with a study, but then how are we then going to translate? How are we then going to make sure that, or try to get the people who need to hear about it to hear about it? You know, how can we phrase this? How can we couch it? How can we communicate it? You know, and so I think realizing that I had those skills to bring to bear to the work, you know, made me feel like confident. You know, and then also I think in doing this work too, I also realized that, you know what, there's some studies that, you know, it doesn't have to go too in depth, but I can do a housing assessment study. That was also another thing that happened post Hurricane Michael. This was an EPA but FEMA partnership where FEMA reached out to EPA and said, hey, can we sort of basically tag on your college underserved partnership program, and can we assist some of these impacted communities? So there's actually Calhoun County in Florida, they had received some state housing funds to rebuild housing, and requirement for that was them to have a housing needs assessment. You know, so okay, you need to tell us. You know, they did know how many houses had been destroyed and how many had to build, but like really assess the need. You know, so in conversation with them, they're like, "Can you do a housing needs assessment for them?" I was like, "Well, I've never done one before, but I'm going to read about it, and okay, I think these are the features they need to have, and sure, I'll do a housing needs assessment, you know, for you." And I think we did a pretty good one, you know, for them. And so I think just realizing that even if I didn't have the content knowledge about anything, that I did have the process, you know, knowledge and the process skills to make it work and to put it together and convene, you know, the important stakeholders, and also build capacity. And I think a lot of environmental justice work is also capacity building. And so I will confess that a lot of the capacity building I have done is with my students, you know, helping them build their capacity to do this kind of work or be aware of these issues, you know. But even with the community residents that we work with, you know, to help them become more confident in articulating what their needs are and all that. Because it's easy to do this engaged work or service learning work and just go in and, you know, zoom in, zoom out, you know, swoop in, swoop out, you know. But then I think if we can leave people with a mindset or even a skill set, or a mindset even better than a skill set, you know, to think about, how can we advocate on our own behalf? How can we even use our own voices? I think that's helpful. And so those experiences, you know, just realizing that, this work is broad and I don't need to be a content expert in many of the issues. I just need to be a good process expert, and I will be able to do a lot of projects. And so it's made my work very varied. I've worked on like, you know, contaminated lands. I've worked on, you know, like hurricane relief and recovery, housing recovery. I'm currently working on a health equity, you know, study, economic opportunity assessments. Like we've done a wide range of things. And again, the process has been similar in most of those things. And also just recognizing the power of collaboration, because by myself, I couldn't have done any of these things, you know, but working, again, with students, working with teams of others, you know, relying on the skills of others definitely made this work possible.
I'm wondering, sorry, let me back up a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of Pensacola Superfund sites, and specifically with attention to the site that you've worked on?
So I worked on two sites, the Escambia County Wood Treating Site or Mid-Commerce Redevelopment Park. And I think that one, that Escambia Wood Treating Company, I think started as a company in about 1942. I'm blanking on when it shut down operations. I can probably look it up, you know, and find it, you know. But I know it was in the 90s that, you know, they had shut down and they were beginning to move residents away, you know. And so the local name they gave it was Mount Dioxin, you know, because as they were beginning the cleanup and the capping and all of those things, like there was just this huge mound, of debris and things like in the middle of the site, and people could see it, so that was the local name they gave to it, But because of that, they definitely had to move like neighborhoods like away. And I know there was a predominantly African American neighborhood that lived there that was just, and they were like, sorry, like you've got to go. And there was no relocation, or like they didn't, as far as I understand, they didn't really provide them any assistance to leave. They were just like, it's not safe for you to be here and you have to go, It's interesting that the area around that site, I think to the, if I'm getting my bearings right, would that be the west end of the site, maybe? Is also, has become almost like a, I don't know if it still is there, but it used to be a big homeless a camp, in those areas. There were actually, the few times I did take students down there, we would like see like the encampment like through the bushes and stuff like that, And so it's I think it's just interesting for me that like, that's like almost like a present day like development like around it, But it also, I guess, speaks to sort of the depressed nature of like these areas and those sites. There was mine dioxin, they cleaned up. So I joined this like really, really late. And again, in 2017, when it was 2017 that EPA published the Ready for Reuse document. And so when it gives that like deed or certificate to the municipality, it says, okay, now you can clean it up. Oh, no, now you can use it for whatever you want, And so that was when I sort of joined, and then engaged students in this like process, applying process. And between 2017 and 2019, we went through a few different partners, county staff, county commissioners, a private company. And then while that was going on, like the city of Pensacola then reached out about the American Creosote work site, in downtown Pensacola, like a bit close to the bay. And even I remember the first time they reached out, I was like, wait, is this the same site? I'm like, and they're like, no, this is a completely different site. And I think it was my first awareness, like, wait, how many of these are there? Because I was like, Pensacola is, it's a medium-sized town. It's like, how many, and I think even for our size, we have a fair number of like Superfund, sites, in our municipality. And so, and I think also just clarifying that, okay, that the one I just worked with was for the county, and now this is in city boundaries, so squaring that away. But then as far as I know, so this was in 2018 in the summer, and engagement was on and off, so I, again, worked with a group of students to help like envision passive park, design for the site, which then the city council voted on, or like saw, and then was, I guess, incentivized to say that yes, we will clean up the site. If this is a possible use, yes, we will approve, the cleanup of the site. As far as I know, like cleanup is just about to happen. There's a lot of planning, and I was on some of those like initial calls, and it stalled for various reasons. I didn't really keep up, with the site, but I know that it's ready to break ground on that. And so I guess that would be, as far as the history of these sites is concerned, and that would be my sort of how I joined the story. It's like towards the end, at points when, I don't know, maybe a lot of the damage had been done, and then people were now rethinking, okay, what can we do to like reuse this? But I think in thinking of my newfound identity as an environmental justice scholar, especially with the American Creosote worksite, I have been a bit more, I don't know if I should say slow, but I've been thinking more about what are the environmental justice implications. Like, you want a passive park, like that's just what you want because you're the neighborhood who lives next to there. What about what others want? Like, it's a city park, so should the discussion be wider than just the people who live around the neighborhood? I also know that there's a few like depressed, and poor neighborhoods around there. Like, do they have a say? Like, what should? So again, I'm thinking more about some of those issues when it comes to that site in particular, because it's important not to. And I remember I even worked with one student, with an honor student, who did the honors thesis about that particular site, and just sort of imagining the possible gentrification that could happen, if that site is cleaned up and becomes a park, it's going to drive up property values. And just realizing that the census tracts around that site, are still very low income and very high minority, and so what would that mean for when, even though that neighborhood there is probably maybe middle income, that immediately surrounds the site is middle income, it still adjusts like a lot of low income communities. And so if it does become a park, what happens to them? Can they afford to live there, So I'm very much more aware of those issues, and just thinking about this issue. I haven't engaged as much with the work, now. Maybe because I also feel anytime we've been asked to engage, it's to create this thing for this one group of people, which I think maybe is unfair, and so maybe I've been less willing to contribute, to that effort.
I think I have time to ask you one more question before I open it up. And I have a lot of stars by a lot of questions, so we won't get to them all today. Thank you so much for this great conversation. I think you're walking kind of around this territory, but I would love to hear you reflect on, you're a recent kind of newcomer to the area as well as to this work, which we know from researching and from talking to other folks has been going on for, in some cases 40 years or decades. How has it been to kind of join this work as an outsider and a newcomer?
It didn't feel so difficult. Part of it is maybe just me. I didn't even make that a consideration. I was just I'm here. This is who I am. We're doing this. Because I even remember my first city Board of County Commissioners presentation. This was spring 2018. The students presented the analysis they had done, and we went downtown, presented it, and it was just we're here. I'm a professor. I belong, and so I think locally in Escambia County, I haven't really felt a lot of resistance to that at all. And maybe it's also, I may have come to Pensacola at a time when the city was, growing and inventing itself and open to maybe outside voices or things like that. I've never really had anyone, I never really felt like an outsider in that sense. I think, but also maybe I haven't also worked as closely with communities that have been as impacted. So when I think about, this isn't really for Brownfield side, when I think about the Wedgwood neighborhood with their borough pits and all those things, they have also, over the years, have researchers come and go and stuff. And so I remember when I was doing work with them, there were some moments of tension or friction, not because maybe I wasn't putting myself as trustworthy, but then because it's just the nature of the beast. And then again, working with university regulations, and there was actually one project that failed because the university kept on wanting to insist that the university would own the data. Basically, air monitors, we're going to collect data, but give the air monitors to residents, track daily readings and stuff. And the university was well, we will own the data. And they were the neighborhood was no, we will jointly own the data. And the university was no, we will own the data and we'll let you have access to the data. And they were no, we will jointly own the data, and back and forth. And they were we're pulling out, And so, which is completely understandable. And so, maybe there was some tensions in that, where I think it wasn't so much my being an outsider to the region, but my being a representative of the university. Because I remember even having a conversation with Keith Wilkins, who was, former City of Pensacola administrator, and we're having a conversation with somebody, I think, who had gotten a grant. And I think at this point he was retired, and he gotten a grant and to do some work with Black farmers. And so he was just exploring possibilities. And then I remember on the call, he was where are you from? The university? Oh yeah, I don't trust UWF and blah, 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 blah. And Keith immediately came to my defense. He's no, but you can trust Kwame. He was Kwame is not like that. I've worked with him. And I was very grateful for that, But then it was also just a recognition that, yes, I think a lot of minority and poor communities, racial ethnic minority and poor communities in maybe this region have not had the best experience with local governance and all of those things. And that definitely is the case for the work that I'm doing in Port St. Joe, where that is a smaller town. It's a very, like a company town, so it's like, the dynamics are very bad there. The optics dynamics is very, very tense, and, sometimes I joke that sometimes when I go there, I feel like I've walked backwards in time, And so, I never struggled with feeling like an outsider, but then I definitely realized that my association with the university wasn't always the most exciting thing for especially minority and like poorer communities. And that was something that I had to like confront, and like I had to earn their trust. I couldn't just assume that because I was coming from the university. I think that worked well when I was working with local governance. Oh, I come from the university. Of course, but then it didn't work well with, the marginalized or impacted or overburdened communities.
I appreciate you reflecting on that.
Yeah.
Thank you. I do want to open it up to the room. We still have a few minutes for my colleagues. Yeah, all right, so I'll pass the microphone down. Mark, will you pass this on? Thank you. And if you'll just introduce yourself, Caitlin. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Remmert. I was wondering, I heard you say earlier that Wedgwood reached out to you. I was kind of wondering, like, what happened after that and what that kind of looked like.
Yeah. So there were two instances. Wedgwood reached out to me because they were part of kind of, I think it was the Kellogg Foundation that funded them, and the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice, I think, out of New Orleans. I think I'm saying their name right. So they had this grant to work with HBCUs and, basically environmental justice or injustice communities on like environmental health and like climate change issues. Because they knew, I think the situation on Wedgwood is a bit regionally known. I wouldn't say like it's well known all over the country, but in the region, like people know about the community and stuff. They identify them as a community, but we don't have an HBCU in Pensacola. There's HBCUs in Tallahassee. So there were staff and professors that were working with out of FSU. FAMU. Sorry, not FSU. I always do FSU FAMU because of the Joint College of Engineering they have. Yeah, so out of FAMU. And so, but then of course they're 3 hours away, and so they reached out to me and like, hey, you're right here. We see you're doing like some of this work with the county and stuff. Like, would you be willing to offer your assistance, to in this work? So I said yes, and so I was part of that group for a while, and actually worked a very small group of students, like 5 students who helped them. I think we helped them draft a environmental justice small grants application. It was ready to submit, but I think some paperwork issues on their end, like the community's end, like didn't enable them to actually apply for that. And so there was that engagement, and I think maybe that was in 2018 or 19, I think. And then in 2020, 2021, they reached out again. It was like, hey, we're still doing this work. How can we partner? And so I had a discussion, and they talked about really wanting to do their own local air quality monitoring, because the county had an air monitor like right outside the neighborhood, which said the readings are fine, but they're like, we know things are not fine, we know things are not good, so we want sort of more granular, like in our home kind of monitoring. So we did some research, bought the monitors, like all of that, and that's when like the back and forth, battle over ownership, data ownership, like, made things fall apart, and I actually remember being a bit upset when that happened, because again, it was in the middle of a course project. It was the middle of the semester when they pulled out. I was like, students have already and that was another learning moment, another pivot, So and the students ended up using the monitors themselves to do some like local, and this was still when we were like remote, So it was just a lot of things, we did meet at the end. We met twice in the semester, once to give them the monitors, and then the second time to take back the monitors, And so after that, I've been in I've not been in like deep engagement with the community leader or leader in particular I was working with, but like I hear of him, he hears of me, like we're cool. Let me put it that way. I don't think we have any like bad experience, but I haven't been able to like engage with them like since that instance, that incident,
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Liya Johny. So considering your ideas of justice and how you've, worked to be in social justice and environmental justice, what would you consider to be justice in this situation? Would it, for the families that relocated who are still in Pensacola, what is justice to them? And then for future generations, what would be their justice?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've actually thought about that a lot. And I almost feel as if the word justice is inadequate, and almost, I don't know how to say this, like, I don't want to say unattainable, but it's like the damage has been done, so to have justice would actually be to reverse it or go back in time, and we can't really do it. So a lot of it almost feels like just redress, like we're just trying to address it and trying to like compensate or repatriate, like do something. Like it's almost like we can't really use justice because like to have justice is to not do the harm, And so I think that's what justice will look like, where yes, we provide redress and maybe compensation or reparation or whatever it looks like for people who have been harmed, but then justice is when we work hard to ensure that this is not going to happen again, and that the children of these people will not have to grow up in such an environment or have to live with contamination or toxicity. That I think that's what justice will really look like, and where not just even those who are impacted, but those who are not impacted who can do something to prevent it, will also be working on behalf or advocating, like to a society where we actually see each other as each other's keepers and are working to ensure that we all have like an equal experience to environmental quality, and if, in a sense, I mean, when you look at the EPA definition of environmental justice, that like the fair and meaningful treatment of all people, and that no one will be disproportionately burdened by this. So I think conceptually what they're saying is that if we do have to maybe have some toxicity somewhere, it's going to be equally distributed, and that's a bold claim because I almost don't see it practically ever happening. But yeah, that's what justice would look like, to see that, okay, we need a landfill. Everyone is going to get a bit of experience of this landfill. We're going to share the nuisance and the noise and the smell around because we need a landfill, and it's not just going to be one community that's going to be burdened like with that. And maybe that's what justice would really look like. Yeah.
Thank you. Is it okay if I ask one more question then?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So you also say that the work you do is about capacity and not really, how talented someone is at a certain subject.
Yes.
So if someone without the resources that, we as students have or you as a professor has, how could they get involved in fighting against this?
Yes. And I think that's where I've seen a lot of the value and the role of this work is where we use the privileges that we have, to partner with those who are on the front lines, to get what they need, to get the resources they need. And so, again, not in Pensacola or this area, but with the community I've been working with in Port St. Joe, that's a lot of the work we've been doing over, I think we started working with them in December of 2020. So let's say spring of 2021 was the first student-led project. And every time it's been to help them get more resources, apply for a grant, and actually that community organization, I don't know if it's happened, maybe it definitely hasn't happened in the region, but then they received 3 EPA grants, like in the space of like a year, One was a collaborative problem-solving grant, one was a brownfields redevelopment grant, another was, I'm trying to think. They received almost like $900,000 in EPA, or one was a job training grant, And so I think, that's what we need to do to build capacity. And actually, some colleagues, or the colleague that I was talking about at the University of South Florida, was trying to, and I think it's still a movement that we're doing in partnership with the the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, to basically identify sort of environmental justice or brownfields communities and organizations, and then connect them with resources, connect them with universities, or like, hey, you have these needs. There's these folks in these universities over there. Almost like try to build some kind of network, who you can reach out to. Like they're an hour away, they're 30 minutes away, they're down the street, And I think that's how we can, because I think the people who don't have the education or the resources might not know that there's people that are available who are willing to help them. And so I think we need to do the outreach and go and see like, hey, we are here. We want to help. How can we help? You know?
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Last question before we wrap it up.
Hi, this is Hannah Bokor. So you were kind of just touching on it with UWF and outreach, but do you know if UWF has any plans to kind of rebuild that distrust between like poor and minority communities and the university?
Yes. So I think UWF has done a lot, you know, in that. So it was actually this semester that someone mentioned to me that the nickname for UWF used to be University for White Folk. I had no idea. I had no idea that that was a thing, you know. And so I think since maybe 2010s or so, like the university has really like made strides, and the university does take community engagement like very serious. We are a Carnegie community engagement classified, like campus and all of that stuff. And so I know that there is a lot more intentionality in that, in thinking about community engaged work, and even thinking about the communities that we like engage with and stuff. But I think it also has to be, I know that a lot of that work is going on at a like individual projects, like faculty level, and there are some programs and vehicles for that. Maybe also because of the state that we live in. I may never hear this from, you know, the university leadership that yes, we are rebuilding. Like I may never hear that, but I do know that it's definitely a value and ideal, and like people are working like towards healing like that relationship. And I think I know it definitely has healed over time. Like I would even say, I can even say even just the number of minority students on campus has definitely increased, you know, in the past 7 years. Like it's tangible even in my own department, you know, like from when I started, and then you know, the number of, you know, Black and brown students I see around, you know. And so I know that there has been a shift. I know there has been like intentional efforts, you know. Again, may never hear it acknowledged from an institutional standpoint that this is exactly what we're doing, you know. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're bumping up against our time together, so thank you so much for welcoming us into your space. Before we stop recording today, is there anything that we didn't think to ask you, or anything that you want to mention before we end, maybe that feels important that we just didn't occur to us?
Oh, I think you covered like, you know, all the bases. I really appreciate the opportunity to reflect in these ways. I'm always grateful when I get the opportunity, because it always, you know, I sometimes think I have the trajectory down, but then I think I always get, oh, there's another piece to that, and something that was defining that I didn't even like connect. So my mind likes to work in those ways to connect the dots. So I really appreciate the opportunity to do so.
Well, it's a pleasure for us to hear from you. And again, thank you so much. I'm sure we will continue the conversation more informally over dinner. So thanks.
Yes. Cool. Thank you. Yeah, thank you all. That was great.
Great, y'all.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it.